Okay, so I'll just pick up here. This is our second contribution to this to this conference with Tomi, Melka, and myself. This is about linear versus nonlinear rongorongo inscriptions, dimensionality, context of use, expert and inexpert hands, and their relevance for the cultural and epigraphic studies of Easter Island. And really ties in with what I was just talking about, or continues with that. Next slide. And this is just some examples of what I was mentioning before. In its ultimate form, what is really the core in many scholars' minds of the canonical, the core corpus, undoubted specimens that were collected primarily in the early 1870s, beautiful calligraphy, beautiful style of inscribing them, and to the point where, as I already mentioned, some people will start to doubt it if they're crudely or sloppily done. Next slide. And some examples I already showed you. Next slide. And as I pointed out before, some even genuine inscriptions. When I say genuine, ones that majority of scholars consider genuine, although there's some doubt about this specimen in particular and some of the others, some are fairly crude. Next slide. Just like the London tablet, I mentioned that before. Next slide. And you've already heard about this from my presentation and also Gordon Berthen's, that the writing order of Easter Island was linear, but it tended to be, or not tended to be, on the classic tablets. It is what's really known as reverse boustrophodon. And next slide, where you would write, or you would read it, you would write it, and you would read it in the order as shown here. So you're flipping the tablets around every time you come to a new line. Next slide. And what happens in the literature is often they take this into account and then rearrange. So here you have sort of standard ordering as if it were English language following it, but notice there's no spacing in most inscriptions, rongorongo inscriptions. People argue about whether there's any quote punctuation. Next slide. And this is sample transcribed of what it looks like on the original tablet in this case. Next slide. And so there are a number of rongorongo bearing artifacts, however, that defy this linearity. And that's what I want to mention now briefly in this presentation, where you don't have this linear arrangement, whether it's boustrophodon or not. And we are convinced, Tomi and I, that studying this puts rongorongo into a broader social scope, a broader context of what this phenomenon is about. And we also believe it could shed light on how to understand it, how to ultimately, which is the hope, I guess, of many rongorongo scholars, to really decode it, if I could use that term, or decipher it, which I believe we all due respect to other researchers, I believe we are still quite a ways away from that ultimate goal. Next slide. So there are specimens that are non-linear. This is one of the, quote, classic ones because this is part of the standard corpus. This is the so-called New York Birdman. Some people argue about it because it wasn't known until the 1890s. No one actually knows who collected or when. It's only known that it showed up at institution in 1890s. Next slide. But it has on it rongorongo, and it has sort of scattered sections or sequences of rongorongo. Next slide. And this gives you an example. This is from Barthel, transcribed by Bodos Brands in Barthel, 1958. And there you can see part of the rongorongo. It's not well according to some people, not well carved. It's not, some people have suggested that it's just sort of almost like scratchings on it. But whoever was writing it, certainly in my assessment, knew rongorongo, but are these just disjointed? Some suggestions that maybe it's actually referring to parts of the bird, anatomical parts. We just don't know at this point. I mean, very little is known about rongorongo, as you heard about from Gordon. The only real sort of inscription that people more or less agree with is the calendar on one tablet. Otherwise, what are the genres that are in the tablets and the other inscriptions? We really don't know. Are they chants? Are they lists of names, etc.? We don't really know with certainty. Next slide. I want to show you a new specimen. This has just come to light. Again, this was collected, and it comes from the family. It was descended in the family of Pascal Boucher. He, as you remember from my last presentation, he was a member of the crew of the Margaret Rate, this whaling ship that came out, left St. John in Canada, and the family kept a lot of specimens. He collected a lot of specimens when they spent about 5 days or so on Easter Island. This is one of them, just resurfaced and came to light. Next slide. And you'll see that it has a rongorongo inscription on this. It's a interesting inscription in our assessment. It's only 6 glyphs on it, but they seem to be an inscription unto itself, a whole inscription. The specimen itself, I've had an opportunity to examine it in hand very carefully. These are my photographs of it, and I am convinced that yes, this is a genuine, real piece. It's got wax on one end, for instance, and I've seen this on other specimens where apparently the whaling crew, probably Pascal Boucher himself, were studying it by candlelight at night because they'd be working during the daylight hours doing their whaling duties. Next slide. And it has these 6 glyphs on it, arranged in a triangular form. And unlike many specimens where they were trying to squeeze as many glyphs as possible onto a tablet or a piece of wood, it looks like these have been arranged purposefully and blank spaces left around them. That essentially this may be meaningful unto itself, this triangular arrangement. Just as a side comment, the different photographs, specimens like this look a little bit different under different light. I took all these at the same time using slightly different light in some cases to bring out features. Next slide. The back of it looks like a birdman head or a bird. In fact, this is very, very deeply carved. My impression, my speculation is that this piece was a fragment of a larger sculpture that something happened to it, it was discarded, that type of thing, and then later the rongorongo inscription was added to the other side. They were reusing the wood. Wood was incredibly valuable on Easter Island. Next slide. And this is showing the specimen for those that are interested. That shows the 4 edges of it, all with patinas and weathering, etc. Next slide, compatible with 1843 collection day. Here is looking at the edge. It looks to me, and I've looked at a number of, I have some training, should we say, in such things, and I've looked at a number of Easter Island specimens and other specimens around the world, antiquities. Looks to me like this was a weathered surface that was then used to carve the inscription on it, the rongorongo inscription, which weathered since then. It's patinaed since then. Again, compatible with being collected in 1843 and may well have been quite old when it was collected. Next slide. This is showing the edge view, and actually you can see the label there, recording that came from Pascal Boucher. Next slide. And if we start looking at the glyphs, we don't know which way they were read, whether they read from the bottom to the top or were they read from the top to the bottom. You know, again, we know so little about the rongorongo script in terms of decoding and translation, or decipherment, I should say. Next slide. So a couple of different orderings are possibilities. I tend to favor the bottom ordering, where you're reading from the bottom to the top, left to right. And I would point out that glyph 70 and 46, they could be interchanged, because what if you're reading from the left to right, then right to left, then the top glyph again. So even the basic ordering is you know, questionable at this point because of our lack of knowledge. Next slide. On the other hand, if we start analyzing this, and this is just some preliminary notes that I'm giving in this presentation that Tomi and I have put together. If you look at the bottom line, no question, you have glyph 600, 27, 700. So the, we'll call it frigate bird glyph, sort of a U shape, and then a fish glyph standing upright. This is found across, I shouldn't say across, but in a number of other canonical inscriptions, those that everyone, scholars of rongorongo, accept. And if you look at this slide, just to explain, where it says QR4, for instance, or H, etc., those are the code letters for different texts, according to Barthel. So that's what that's showing there. And this is not just coincidental, we don't believe. And when you start looking at it in more detail, you can start to see where the 627, 700 glyphs appear in other contexts, other situations. And I won't go into detail with this. You can analyze this slide later if you are looking at a recording of it and want to stop. Next slide. But the bottom line is that we are finding glyphs and pairs of glyphs and triads of glyphs that are found elsewhere, seem to have a purposeful meaning. And there's this paraphrasing and rephrasing, and this is seen across the rongorongo corpus. And we have it in this newly resurfaced specimen. And bottom line is that we're convinced that this is not going to occur unless someone really is familiar with rongorongo and suggests that this new specimen, this Boucher fragment, we'll call it, deserves to be studied and included in serious analyses of rongorongo, and being potentially a complete inscription to itself could shed light, as sure as it may be. Next slide. And we point out that this has been the case for other specimens, according to other researchers. For instance, the Paris snuff box, which was made out of a rongorongo tablet that was cut up by a sailor. Remember, I mentioned the fragment in the last talk that where apparently a tablet was cut up for souvenirs. Well, this seems to have been the same case with the Paris snuff box. It was a tablet was cut up in the 19th century by presumably a sailor who collected it, or a carpenter who got it from a sailor who collected it to make a snuff box. But the glyphs on it seem to be genuine, and they show correlations with other known inscriptions that you wouldn't expect unless someone really knew rongorongo. It's also interesting that potentially the glyphs on this Paris snuff box were carved with a metal tool, but it still seems, at least I think, and many of us think, it's authentic, although there is some disagreement on that too. Next slide. And just as a cross-cultural note, here is Apollinaire, the poet of the early 20th century. and one of his calligrams, as they call it, poem placed in a triangular form, or in this case, to mimic the Eiffel Tower. Next slide. And this shows from England, the late 10th century English manuscript, where parts of it are also purposefully done in triangular form, this case inverted triangles, if you would. Again, one could argue little to do with rongorongo, except the concept of what I'll call visual poetry. Do we see that with the Boucher fragment also? Next slide. Here's another specimen. I'm just going mentioning briefly that Tomi and I have published. This is hair amulet. I can't say now. Kutsubu hair amulet. Sorry, I'm starting to cough. Collected in 1816, around 1860, during a voyage which stopped at Easter Island. And next slide. It's got hair wrapped around it, but the head of it, if you would, has what were four glyphs. One is effaced, but they again show not your strict linear arrangement. Well, one could argue they're wrapped around, so maybe they were meant to be linear. But how do we interpret this? What do we make of this? Next slide. Just as a cross-cultural comparison, here's a circular arrangement, Etruscan on a drinking cup. Next slide. Another specimen I want to point out is this was also collected by Pascal Boucher, and I mentioned this briefly in our previous presentation just a half hour or so ago. This is a pendant, and this pendant was collected in 1843, again by Pascal Boucher, of the Margaret Raitt, the whaler named Margaret Raitt, the ship. And next slide. And what we have on it is, I'm convinced from analyzing in person the specimen, that it's good, it's well patinaed, it has an incredible provenance, and it has a complete inscription. I am convinced this is the complete inscription, these 6 glyphs on it. And as I mentioned before, these glyphs were outlined by little micro perforations. Next slide. And there you can see the top row of glyphs. Next slide. Bottom row glyphs. And note that these glyphs are all right side up. Well, that makes sense because this was a pendant hanging around someone's neck, presumably, and you'd want to see the glyphs. You wouldn't be turning it upside down to see the next line of glyphs. So they are following, we'll call it a right side up pattern for both lines, and we know that because we can tell up and down on these particular glyphs. Now, which line do you read first? Next slide. We don't know. Do you read the bottom line first or the top line first? My preference might be for the bottom line first and then the top line, but it could be vice versa. We just don't know enough about how they were using it in a context like this to be certain. Next slide. But when we start analyzing it, this last, in the way I've shown it in this slide, that's Maki Maki, the face mask, the big eyes. This seems to have something to do with the god. This is the high god of the Easter Islanders, Maki Maki. So maybe as a protective charm, calling on him to protect the person who's wearing it. We just don't know. It's a eulogy to Maki Maki, but he seems to be involved somehow. And this comes to the bigger question of how do we decipher, how do we decode, how do we interpret things from I'm sorry, things from Easter Island. When I say things, other sculptures and whatnot from Easter Island, as well as the rongorongo script, because we really don't have a good concept of pre-missionary rongorongo people, or the Rapa Nui, I should say, and how they were using it, what their cultural background was, what was common to them, how they would interpret things. So in the middle of this slide, how do you read that? Do we have any concept of how we would read that now? Or if we went back to somehow magically early 19th century Easter Island, would they be able to make sense of our 21st century symbols? No. So, not insurmountable, but there are major issues to this day with trying to figure out rongorongo, at least in my assessment. Next slide. This is one more specimen I want to just show very briefly. This is a portion of a human skull. It turns out that the Easter Islanders, they venerated human skulls and fragments of human skulls and other bone parts from their ancestors. It may not be to the many Western sentiment today that think that's sort of weird and ugly, but no, they did, and they used them often as the supports like a canvas to make inscriptions, to draw, to paint. And this is one that was also recently resurfaced. We don't know exactly who collected this. It ostensibly was also collected, and I think it's very believable, by one of the whalers in the 19th century, potentially from the Margaret Rate. It came out of New Brunswick. It was came from a New Brunswick family, apparently. But look at it. Next slide.
You have 5 minutes left.
Okay, thank you. Next slide. And it has these painted glyphs or symbols on it. This one, and I mentioned the Birdman and the Birdman cult and how that ties in with at least some aspects of rongorongo. This seems quite evidently to be a Birdman. It's an anthropomorphic form, but it has the bird's head, specifically the gular pouch and whatnot of a frigate bird, and it is holding what's known as a rapa or possibly a ao. These were symbols of authority and power. I won't go into great detail right now, but basically this with the Birdman, maybe this represents a Birdman contestant who won and took the authority for that year as the quote reigning Birdman, or at least his chief, because the contestants actually would often represent their clan or chief. So the one who won wasn't necessarily the quote final Birdman, it was his sponsor, should we say. Next slide. And if we start looking at the glyphs or the symbols, whatever you want to call them, the configurations, the drawings on this skull fragment, all of them, certainly we think at least 4 out of 5, potentially all 5 of them do correspond to rongorongo glyphs. And something else that I have on this slide is that maybe these glyphs originated from petroglyphs. This was already mentioned by Gordon Berthon in his presentation. Next slide. Show you 2 more pieces very quickly. This is a post-missionary piece. I talked about this at an earlier grapho-linguistics conference, an earlier conference in this series, and this we call the Easter Island Sacred Amulet. It was collected in the 1880s, and here we have glyphs at this point, which seem to be sort of more or less scattered over the surface, but they might look just scattered chaotically to us because we don't know how to interpret them. Next slide. And in our assessment, this is probably some kind of lunar-based calendar, and in fact, it has the symbol for the moon on it, the 152 glyph from Barthel, and you'd already heard about this glyph to a certain extent from Gordon Berthen, but here it is, and what seemed to be early post-missionary piece with rongorongo. Next slide. And then the last specimen I want to mention now is this gorget. It's a shell gorget known as a rhea in the old Rapa Nui language, and on it are two well-attested glyphs on it, on the horns or the ears of it, if you would, 200 and 290, which are interpreted generally as some kind of human anthropomorphic glyph and a turtle-like glyph, and they're not linear, they're separated. Next slide. Although one could argue that they're separation, they're still in a linear position, but we suspect that whether they're right next to each other or they're on the two horns of this gorget, the meaning, whatever it was, these coming together would have been obvious to the literate Rapa Nui person. They would have known what was going on with this, what it meant, whether it was a linear, strict linear or not. Next slide. So we've attempted to make the case that rongorongo is more varied, occurred in more situations than is usually recognized by scholars. And I think that it's important not only to look at the large, long, canonical inscriptions that are known, and certainly Tomi and I are doing that, but to also take into account the evidence we have of other inscriptions, other glyphs that are being used in diverse situations. Some of those may help hold the key to fully understanding this phenomenon. And of course, this, like our previous presentation, a lot more I could say, and we'll extend that in written form. Next slide. Then again, just so it's on the record, this is an abstract that goes with it. Next slide. And give it a moment. The next slide. Next slide. Thank you. Next slide. Next slide. And next slide. A few references that go with the presentation because, in fact, we expanded even since the abstract. Next slide. I don't know if the next slide. And next slide. Next slide. There we go. So thank you very much. I, again, appreciate this conference. I appreciate your attention and interest. And I just find all of this absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Robert. I'm afraid we are out of time. We have no time for any questions. Yes, Gordon has a question. Yes, a large part of the conference is waiting for us for the closure. So we will have to stop here. So thank you very much, Robert. And I really enjoyed you again and the conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Bye.